Greetings all. This is Glenn Albrecht in Australia. Delight to be with you, and I'm very grateful for Peter and all those at the University of Silesia and others who have invited me to participate. Of course, the title of the conference, Fungi and Others Towards the Symbiocene, is dear to my heart. I've been working on this concept of the Symbiocene since 2011. My talk is on the Symbiocene, why we need conceptual metamorphosis. I think metamorphosis is the appropriate word now, not revolution, because revolution implies a return to a previous state or a circular motion. I'm heading in a completely new direction. My work is well known for the concept of solastalgia, which I think aptly describes the Anthropocene as an era in human history. This is an image of the Upper Hunter of New South Wales in Australia. It's what happens when open pit or open cut coal mining takes place. In the background is an extremely large coal-fired power station. And if you want to see the Anthropocene, in my view, this is exactly where you need to come to see it at its height. That kind of scenery produces what I call negative earth emotions. Negative earth emotions are those that we find upset us, distress us, cause us pain when our much loved home environments are being changed for the worse around us. Solastalgia is a concept that I've pioneered in order to explain that kind of negative emotion that comes from a negatively perceived change of your home environment. There are many more. I've even created a new one recently, just a matter of weeks ago, which I call Mursis, which is an extremely painful, terrible emotion, which is the realization that we are in fact responsible for our own death from environmental causes. Solastalgia, as I said, is the lived experience of negative environmental change. It's a form of homesickness you have when you are still at home, but your home leaves you. It's the opposite of traditionally defined nostalgia. Solastalgia can occur in all sorts of places, and I feel it's important to acknowledge that it's not a biomedical problem that can be fixed by biomedicine. It's a malady of the spirit or of the soul or of the mind or of our emotional state. And algia in solastalgia means an emotional pain, a state of sorrow, a state of grief. It combines all of those into a new word, solastalgia, which is the loss of solace, the loss of comfort from your loved home environment. And so being an emotion which is caused by the structural changes imposed by particularly economics and politics on loved home environments, it's actually caused by a form of development, not by any kind of lesion in the brain. I also am working on a critique of our current paradigms that we use to explain our relationship to nature. Terms such as nature itself, environmentalism, ecologism, sustainability, conservation, resilience, regeneration, you know them all. There are so many now that I think they're delivering us into a form of what I call green lock. We are unable to amalgamate and have collaboration amongst our different environmental paradigms because we're too locked into the economics of how we raise money, academic closed systems. Also, many of these terms don't have an emotional content. They prevent emotional engagement with the symbiotic partnerships that characterize life. And it's this that is the theme of my talk. We need to go beyond the paradigms and emotions of Greenlock in order to re-engage with life. And in particular for humans, not all humans, because not all have lost their emotional connection to nature and life, but those that have, are pretty much those who are doing the most damage right now. As I said, I created this new concept, Mursis. I've created it in order to destroy it because it's a feeling beyond grief that takes us to the inevitability of death. We're trying to do a lot of work with grief at the moment, too much. I think we're actually taking it away from its original meaning, which is this intense feeling of sorrow at the loss, at the permanent loss of someone who was once living and part of your life arrangements. But Mursis involves a personal feeling of imminent death for which one is responsible. It also includes a sense of shame about our failure to prevent the events that were leading up to this moment in time. We're mortified, a word in English. So I wish to remind you that I've created Mursis to preemptively destroy it. And this talk is also an appeal to you all to help me in the destruction of something which I hope does not quite exist as yet. And that help is in the form of exiting the Anthropocene and entering the Symbiocene. I'm hoping that you can see clearly the need to exit from a situation where we're facing Mursis, our own self-destruction and our own responsibility for it, and move to its opposite, which is it's the creation of a future that's worth living in. And Symbiocene obviously comes from symbiosis. Scene means period or era. And I want us to actively metamorphose from the Anthropocene to the Symbiocene. Most of you, I hope, have some knowledge of the science of symbiosis, but I, as a philosopher and transdisciplinary thinker, I'm interested in where symbiosis came from. And it comes from the ancient Greek, and it means to live together. Symbio, and SIS on the end represents a state of being. It's a special relationship between unlike parties to a living partnership. Par means equal, so partnership implies that even if you're different, you can have an equal relationship with others. It's also a form of companionship, and companion is another interesting word. Pan means bread. If you break bread together, you feed at the same table. And this word symbiosis was used in ancient Greek, and it was applied to both human and non-human contexts. The most obvious context is biology, and early Greek writers such as Aristotle wrote about symbiosis in the animal world, particularly the visible animal world, because as we are fully aware, they didn't have microscopes back in those days. So it was observation of that which was in the macro or visible world. And there were two famous examples in Greek biology, the fan shell or pinna of the Mediterranean and its special relationship to a small crab called the pinna guard. And it was one where they shared food, where the shell would be open. If a fish would swim in, the little crab would pinch the inside of the shell would shut close and the crab would get inside before the shell closed, and they would both feed on the fish. And the other famous example is the plover that removes rotting food and leeches parasites from the mouth of crocodiles. And quite clearly, this is an important case study, even if the history is not as exactly as clear as we would like. But the bird is clearly removing the crocodile of parasites. The parasites cause the crocodile harm, and symbiosis is where the plover and the crocodile enjoy the benefits. The other context is society, where symbiosis in Greek society included many related concepts, most commonly concepts such as cohabitation, social intercourse, communion, and commerce. It involved friendship or good fellowship, and it was quite possibly strongly connected to human intimate relationships, including sexual commerce. And in English, the word commerce was a synonym for sexual intercourse, for many centuries. And it also applied to marriage, particularly the marriage between men, but I can't imagine it would be exclusive only of that kind of marriage. The coming together of unlike parties and sharing common benefits was the meaning of the word symbiosis in ancient Greek society. And it wasn't until 1877 that Albert Frank, a German botanist, created the term in German to describe a science which described this mutualistic relationship between, in this case, he was studying algae and fungi, collaborating within lichens. He described this relationship in terms of symbiotismus to describe this coexistence within lichens, and he made it quite clear that this is a relationship way beyond parasitism. He was looking for a word that described something that took us out of the realm of parasites and into the realm of collaboration and cooperation between unlike creatures for mutual benefit. And then the word symbiosis was coined a year later by the mycologist Anton de Bary, and he described this relationship as the living together of unlike organisms. He left the definition a bit open, and that included parasites, but I think Frank in 1877 was definitely on the right track. And since that time, there's been a revolution in scientific terms from the obsession with parasites and conflict to the application of the ideas of symbiosis to nearly every aspect of biological evolution, and also the transfer of those ideas in biology to social contexts. And I've given you a list there, and they include the famous Lynn Margulis, who in the 20th century was certainly a pioneer of the study and research of symbiosis in biology, and also symbiogenesis, the idea of evolution through symbiosis, which became it's not in opposition to Darwinian evolution, but another view of evolution, which at least is equally important. And this evolution by symbiogenesis, the painstaking under microscopes, discovering that the relationships between beings in life is more one of symbiosis than anything else. Lynn Margulis famously argued, we are all holobionts, multiple creatures living together for mutual benefit within the same time and space. And it's common in my circles to hear academics and others talk about humans being more than human. But in a sense, we've always been more than human. Our DNA is actually formed by ancient viral infections that transferred genetic material into our own. Our mitochondria were once free living organisms, bacteria, that are now transferred throughout life as the so-called engines of energy. We can actually see our eyelash mates if we've got good eyesight, but normally, as the joke goes, we're totally unaware of them, and that they have sex on our face every night while we're asleep. The gut microbiome is now famous. We know now that every orifice in our body has its own microbiome, and it's busy working with us to produce health in what we call the human organism. There are trillions of others all working together to produce health in what we think of as our self. But I think this is truly revolutionary knowledge. It's metamorphic knowledge in a sense as well, because we didn't know this before. It's brand new knowledge that has been delivered to us from about the 1930s through electron microscopes and other forms of seeing the invisible. So on the basis of that knowledge, so there is a science basis to this idea of the Symbiocene. It will be the next period in human history where human technology and culture will be symbiotically linked to both the structure and the processes found at various scales from the micro to the macro in living systems. And so I think it's important to emphasize that the argument for the Symbiocene is primarily or foundationally science-based. And with the Symbiocene, I wish to give emphasis to positive earth emotions, where, like my granddaughter handling a little chicken on Wallaby Farm where we used to live, there are positive earth emotions that can help us deliver the Symbiocene, build it, reinforce it, protect it, and keep it indefinitely into the future. Again, I don't have time to go through all of these, but I'm responsible for terms like endemophilia, the love of the local or the endemic, soliphilia, the love of working with others to protect precious places, euteria, which is a feeling of oneness with life and its living forces, and guif, a new one that I created last week. Gui is connected to life, the being of life, and guif, it has an uncanny resemblance to grief, and I quite like that because it's its direct opposite. It's a feeling of complete and utter joy in the connections that we have to life. So, guif, to live, from the Indo-European root word gui. Just to reiterate, it's an emotional state of self and common created life, and extansion, which is the opposite of extinction. And so I think our emotions can be reactivated and guided by the idea of the Symbiocene. It has its practical applications. For example, there are so many things that most environmentalists have been banging on about for decades now, if not half a century or longer. Things like renewable energy is a no-brainer, as the Americans say, even though the Americans don't seem to have the brains to actually implement renewable energy. But I think we can even go further than that into bioenergy. Instead of digging up lithium, we can press bacteria and algae into our service so that when they live, as they enjoy doing, they start producing our energy. Others are just common sense, biodegradability, non-toxic. I mean, whoever voted for a government that allowed or permitted toxic, uh, harmful chemicals into our environment? Recyclable, all of those sorts of things are common sense, but some of the new ones that I'm dealing with are conserving symbiotic bonds within and between species. We're committing symbiocide, which is the destruction of symbiotic bonds between living creatures on a global scale. In Australia, it's the Great Barrier Reef. I'm sure you have examples all over the world that you can think of. Repairing damaged symbiotic relationships becomes hugely important work. And because we're Homo sapiens, so-called wise humans, we can create new symbiotic bonds using bioscience and technology to do this. I use AI to generate images of the Symbiocene because obviously there are none in the contemporary world that I can present you to stimulate your thinking and your creative juices. There's a building that has an eye in it, and the eye is perfectly placed to receive the light from the various solstices. It may even be able to move on its axis, and it's a celebration of the patterns and rhythms in nature. It obviously is it's created using living materials. Other people that I work with and who are very much inspired by the Symbiocene are people like architects in London. PLP architects are now creating building materials out of mycelium. And so they're now becoming symbiotechs. That I jokingly laugh with them and say the archi, which means to rule in architecture, has to go. It's the wrong attitude. I've also been inspired by people who are now building whole structures out of mycelium. There are now mycelium coffins, so as I get older, I could order one and have myself buried in a mycelium coffin for a quick return to Earth. There are other technologies that are equally inspiring, cell cultures, using algae to produce plastics. These are all now possibilities. Importantly, art and artists have also been inspired by the concept of the Symbiocene, and you can now find hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of people using art and culture inspired by the very idea of the Symbiocene. And there are people opposing the Anthropocene and who are attempting their very best to bring about the metamorphosis that's needed to get us out of the Anthropocene. Again, as I couldn't find the appropriate art or image to illustrate that this process of moving out of the Anthropocene and into the Symbiocene is one that should be filling us with the joy of life, the joie de vie. I welcome you all to the Symbiocene. I suggest that once you're in it, you'll never want to leave. And so thank you for your time.